Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, attorney Kim Hegwood of Your Legacy Legal Care, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Good morning, Kim. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be on this show with you. Thank you.
Girl, I could be so excited about having you on the show, and so because our listeners really love you, so we're super excited for you to be on today. And today we're going to talk about routine and structure for dementia patients and their caregivers, and I think this is an excellent topic, and for our listeners, and so we're going to kind of dig in a little bit, and maybe talk about some benefits of establishing a routine for someone with dementia.
Absolutely. I would love to share that because it is important for not just that caregiver, but for that person who has any cause of dementia symptoms. Because if that individual is needing a caregiver in their life because they have dementia symptoms, then one of those dementia symptoms is their inability to process information, especially new information. There's no place in their brain that has been damaged by an illness or disease or brain trauma. There's no place for them to store new information. So it's easier, it gives them more confidence. It empowers them when we rely on information they already have. So they don't have to think, because remember, they have now a broken thinker. So it's important that routine, it provides that consistency and order in which tasks are completed, so they can go back and understand, now it's time to get ready for bed, or they might need to have a routine about brushing their teeth or using the bathroom or washing their hands or going to bed. So when we have a good routine structure in place, that balances time for physical activity and rest, social interaction, and it helps them to maintain the abilities they have and not focus on what they've lost. It reduces anxiety for both the caregiver and that person who has the dementia symptoms, and it decreases that caregiver stress, which is important. We're going to talk a little bit more about that and why. But it also, like I said, allows for some independence. It focuses more on what they still can do and those brain functions that they still have, which makes them feel a sense of accomplishment and value. And we want to do that. And it also, it provides that successful feeling that they can do it. So that is soothing to them.
And so I think that anytime that you don't have to make hard decisions is always a good thing. And so,
absolutely.
We talk about, all these good reasons of why, you have a routine for someone that has dementia, but how does it affect having that routine for the caregiver themselves?
Well, once again, that provides that caregiver the structure that helps them not to have to make decisions, like you said. When you have a schedule, then you don't have to think about what comes next. And that when a caregiver all the demands on that caregiver, they're constantly having to think about, what do I do now? And how do I keep that person feeling, loved, safe, secure, and valued? And so having a structure for that caregiver also allows them that opportunity not to have to think so much. They're having to think for two people, right? And so that it provides that structure that is soothing for everyone.
I think consistency probably, just knowing that what you're doing the next step, probably when you don't have to make a lot of decisions, I think is probably easy for a lot of people as well. And so,
absolutely. It really does help in giving that stabilization, that that feeling of security that when you're in the dementia care landscape, it's constantly changing. So we do need to remain fluid and flexible, but it helps us to have that stability, like I said, that feeling of security.
Most definitely. So you talk a lot about having a daily schedule. And so can you tell our listeners, how that schedule, might look and how detailed it should be to give them an idea about how they go about doing one for themselves?
You know, absolutely. And we need to think of a few things when we think about making a schedule. So we want to make all the choices simple, not too much information, because once again, that loved one, that resident, that client, they're beginning to have challenges when there's too much information to process. And so we work with their schedule and their abilities. So it's nice to kind of know what their schedule was in the past, because that's like muscle memory. Those activities, what time did they usually have breakfast? What time did they wake up? What time did they like to do their morning grooming and daily activities? When did they usually go to bed? So those things are embedded in that long-term memory that they can access and feel good about. We want to keep balance. We want to balance the activities and rest, because we don't want to give them too much information once again. And their brain, because it's having to work so hard to process information, their brain is going to get tired easily. And when we tire out their brain by making it think too hard, then we tend to have sundowning later in the day, because their brain is so tired, so exhausted. And it's hard for the caregiver to think about that, because it's still easy for that caregiver most of the time to be processing information kind of on autopilot. And we have to keep in mind that now it's harder for that person to think and to process and to find meaning in everyday activities. So, and don't be afraid of repetition. It's okay to repeat. It's okay to, if it works, repeat. If it doesn't, back up and reframe and decide what might work better. There's going to be loss throughout this process where it worked yesterday, but it doesn't work today. So we need to keep fluid and flexible. And there's lots of things that we have to think about too. We have to think about managing the daily routine when it comes to eating and nutrition. And so we have to keep the food choices simple. And we have to think about dressing. We don't want them to think too much. So it's not giving them several different choices. It's giving them a choice that makes them feel good. Not, do you want to wear the blue blouse or the red blouse today? It's, let's wear the blue one because it matches your eyes and you look so beautiful. Making them feel good about the choice that they're making. So we give them what I call positive action statements, so that they don't have to think about it. They just do it and feel good about it. There's routines of bathing, and that can always be quite the challenge. So they become very resistant to that, because there's so much to think about. I might fall. It doesn't feel safe in the bathroom anymore. I have a difficult time with water temperature. So we want to let them do as much as they can without getting anxious, but we try and keep that routine that makes them feel safe. So there's all of that with bathing. Just the simple things of grooming. We have to help that person do things that like brushing their teeth and combing their hair, that they may not be able to think about anymore themselves. So perhaps we do it with them. Let's brush our hair together, or, let's brush our teeth together. And that helps to cue them and feel more comfortable about doing that when they do have a loss. So we want to be really careful that we get all of those things in there. There's the personal challenges of using the bathroom, toileting. And so we want to provide good visual cues for them. Maybe we can use a sign on the door or keep the door open so they can see, that when a person who has loss of brain function, when they see the toilet, often that triggers about how to feel and what to do with that information. So we want to give them visual cues so they don't have to think. And we want to give them opportunities to use the bathroom often. A lot of times their body has started to break down a little bit, and their kidneys and their bladder are filling up faster. We do want to keep them hydrated, and so using the bathroom more often is helpful. And sometimes we might want to try and limit fluids after 6 p.m. because that will help with the nighttime routine. Perhaps keeping them dry longer at night. So those are really personal things that we don't want to ever provide them a feeling of shame, but provide them a feeling that we're helping them to manage that and they don't need to be concerned. And of course, we want to make sure that we have a routine that doesn't involve a lot of clutter or choices or asking them a lot of questions. So those are all things that we have to think about when we're establishing that daily routine. And once again, we want to utilize their past experiences so that we are accessing what time are they comfortable having breakfast? What was their usual time? What time lunch? What kinds of activities did they usually do in the morning? Was it more quiet activities? So we can schedule a time for them to read the newspaper or read the newspaper with them, because that's what feels familiar to them. Anything that's familiar is going to help them feel safe and secure.
So we've spent some time talking about routines and consistency. How important is it to be flexible and adapt to changes?
Well, we're going to have good days and we're going to have bad days. And so it is all about how life is making them feel in the moment. All behaviors are based on how they're feeling in that moment, because the feelings and emotions remain even when they lose the ability to regulate those feelings and emotions, to understand the triggers, to think about why they're feeling that way. The feelings, the raw emotions still remain. So it's important that we go with their feelings. So they might wake up and let's just say they had a bad dream. And so they're feeling very insecure and not safe. And so they may need a little bit more time that particular morning. It might not work very well if you're immediately sticking scrambled eggs and toast under their nose when they're feeling very anxious. So you might need to take a little walk that morning, or just sit and hold their hand and let them process those emotions, help them to process, help them to manage, because they've lost the ability to do that on their own. So it's okay to be flexible and change when they are asking you to do that. Put in front of them that routine, but if they're resisting, then there's something else going on that you need to work through, some unresolved emotions. So you just talk to them about those feelings, you face those emotions, you help them feel that, give them, allow them permission to feel that in that moment. And then you can always come back to the routine when they're ready.
So, a lot of this seems to be kind of overwhelming if you think about it. And so how do you simplify tasks, to help someone with dementia? Because I think it's going to be really important to have fewer steps when you're doing things.
Absolutely. So first of all, we don't ask questions. We only give them the information they can handle. Just like the movie, you can only give them the information, only what they can handle, and they can handle and manage less and less information. So we do want to make it simple, and we don't want to ask them to think. So, for example, Kim, they can only process information in the moment. So if you had dementia symptoms and you were challenged with this, and I was your caregiver, it would be confusing for you if I asked you, would you like chicken or fish? Because I can say chicken, but then when I pull that option away from you and say fish, you're always going to choose the one right in front of you. So you would say fish because you can only process. Once I pull chicken away, that information's gone. There's no place for them to store that. So you say fish, but then when I go prepare fish and bring it to you, what's likely to happen? You're going to say, I don't want fish, because once I pull fish away to go prepare, that information is gone as well. So instead, help them with what feels good to them. So it would work much better if I said to you, I made your favorite fried chicken. Let's go have lunch together. I love it when we have lunch together. So I'm making that decision, and I'm not discounting because I've done my homework. I know that you prefer fried chicken. As a matter of fact, that's one of your favorites. So I'm just helping you to attach that decision to something that's going to make you feel good, because that's my job now as a dementia-aware caregiver. I want you to feel loved, safe, secure, and valued as often as possible, because feelings are what's left when these folks have this loss. So me saying, how's that going to make you feel, Kim, if I say, I made your favorite fried chicken? You don't have to think. You can just enjoy it, right? So how does it make you feel when I ask you to make that decision? Do you want chicken or fish? How's that feel?
Well, I have to think. I don't want to think.
And it makes you anxious to try. And I know a lot of people think that we're being condescending, but I think it's being condescending when we make them anxious by making them think. We don't want them to feel anxious. We want them to feel loved, safe, secure, and valued. And if making that decision for them makes them feel that, then I don't believe that I'm being condescending. I believe I'm being supportive.
Yeah, I think so too. And so, all right, let's add one last thing. Now that we've talked about a bunch of different, one last thing. What about social connections? In daily routine. I have a problem remembering names, and that's been consistent. It's faces I usually never forget, but names, I struggle with names. And so how do you do, when you're adding social connections in the daily routine, because you want them to be not isolated and alone, how do you do that?
Well, don't ask them to remember names, and you can do that for them. But, I love adult daycare. I love having in-home care come to you. I love any kind of social activity that is simple, where you're involving someone who also is dementia aware. Family members, you can help everyone who comes into the life of your loved one with dementia symptoms by helping them to understand this as well. So, maybe you have family close by, and so you want them to also have the same approach, and to take, and everyone will enjoy it much more when they're feeling empowered and understand what's going on in that person's brain. So, teach all the family members not to ask questions, to have those positive action statements. Find adult daycare that utilizes this kind of care approach, that's not going to overwhelm them with too much activity that they can't process or enjoy, but that they've learned to keep it simple and to only provide the kinds of activities that make that person feel good and feel successful. So, you can also, you can help your the medical professionals in their life to also not pepper them with questions and make them feel so overwhelmed. Kim, I don't like it when someone just is peppering me with questions, and that feels really invasive. You can get lots of great information without asking a direct question of that person. And so we need to practice that as well, even the medical professionals. And that caregiver can help those medical professionals by kind of being that buffer and not answering for that person, but helping the medical professionals get an idea of how that person with dementia symptoms feels, because that caregiver is wise to that.
So see, every time I have you on, it's such good information. And so Laura, tell people how they find you. So if they've got loved ones, they need, all your good information. How do they find you?
They can call me on my cell phone, 916-792-7512. Now, recognize that I do a lot of travel. And so if I don't get back to you within 24 to 48 hours, it's okay to call me again. You will have much more luck getting a hold of me if you email me or text me. That phone number you can text, because then I have time to process your information and get back to you sooner, especially if I am traveling. And of course, you can visit my website. My website has tons and tons of information, laurawayman.com. So you can email me. It's real easy to remember. I can provide help at laurawayman.com. That's my email. Let me provide help. And that is kind of my preferred method of you contacting me initially, so that I can have time. Now, if you email me a long, involved story, I might say, let me get back to you. Let's do a consultation, a phone call, because if it's too much for me to type in and email you the answer, then I do like to have the opportunity to have a more personal conversation. Of course, I do have my book, A Loving Approach to Dementia Care, published by Johns Hopkins University Press. It's in its 3rd edition. I'm working on some new things for a 4th edition coming out next year. So there's tons of information in that too. So I just look for ways to provide support to caregivers who are dealing with a loved one, a patient, a resident, a community member, a neighbor who has any cause of dementia symptoms.
Perfect. Thanks so much for being on the show again. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. And I hope you're having some good travels and having tons of fun.
Thank you, Kim, and same to you. Thank you so much for what you do.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcast, as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.